and welcome to World Insight with Tian coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, U.S. Secretary of State Tillerson has traveled across the Gulf to mediate the Qatar diplomatic crisis. Can the U.S. really be a stabilizing influence in this latest Middle East standoff? It has been 1 year since the South China Sea arbitration case strained the relations between China and the Philippines. But how have these bilateral ties improved since the inauguration of Philippine President Duterte? And Chinese AI and tech company iFlytek was recently listed in the MIT 50 smartest companies, ranking above even some of the most established Chinese tech firms. I went to their showroom and tried to find out why. We start today's program in the Middle East. The U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is traveling around the Middle East and has met ministers from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt in an attempt to end their joint dispute with Qatar. Tillerson is set to travel back to Qatar on Thursday to brief the Emir on his talks in Saudi Arabia. Although all 5 nations are U.S. allies, Tillerson's efforts have so far been in vain.
U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has been traveling among the feuding Arabic countries in recent days. He signed an accord with Qatar on tackling terrorism financing on Tuesday, in what he termed a milestone deal.
The agreement includes milestones to ensure both countries are accountable to their commitments. Together, the United States and Qatar will do more to track down funding sources, will do more to collaborate and share information, and will do more to keep the region and our homeland safe.
Right after his trip to Qatar, Tillerson flew to Saudi Arabia, where he met officials from Qatar's quote, opponents. However, they didn't seem to buy the deal signed between the U.S. and Qatar. Instead, they argued the accord, in their words, falls short of allaying their concerns. The talks with the 4 Arab nations in the Saudi Red Sea city of Jeddah didn't seem to be productive. But it didn't surprise many since Tillerson announced on Monday during his trip in Qatar that the U.S. was not going to play the role of mediator.
My role here is to support the efforts of the Emir of Kuwait and the Kuwaiti mediator to bring what we can to the discussions to help both sides more fully understand the concerns of the relative parties and also point out possible solutions to those.
The month-long quarrel has been the worst crisis to hit the Gulf Cooperation Council since its formation in 1981. The 4 countries led by Saudi Arabia severed ties with Qatar last month, accusing it of financing extremist group and allying with the Gulf Arab states' archfoe Iran. Doha denies those accusations. Experts worry if the U.S. mediation doesn't work, it might affect the U.S. military's regional goals, especially anti-terror operations. It might also increase Iran's influence in the region.
So can the U.S. Secretary of State Tillerson's Gulf visit be the breakthrough needed to break the diplomatic deadlock in the region? We have our panel weighs in. Joining us in Washington, D.C., Ali Al-Ahmed, who is the director of the Institute for Gulf Affairs. He is a Saudi analyst focusing on politics in the Persian Gulf region. In Doha, we invited Mahjoub Sweiri, who is an associate professor in Qatar University. I want to welcome the 2 of you. Later, we're also going to be joined by an American panelist. First of all, let me go to you, Professor Sweiri. What exactly do you think can be achieved by Secretary of State?
Tillerson has left Doha this afternoon, after his meeting with the Emir of Qatar and the Foreign Minister, there was no press conference, no communication with the media. What this is maybe an indicator that the diplomatic or the effort what's done from Tillerson in the last 48 hours has not led to something clear yet. What we assume or what we are sure of, that this is the day number 39 of the crisis. the four countries insist on their demands. Qatar believe that these demands is unrealistic, and it's touched the issue of sovereignty of Qatar. We have a new effort will be started Saturday by the French Foreign Minister, who will come to the region, and also it's expected that the President Erdogan will visit also Doha and Riyadh. So this is, it seems all of these efforts are coming, just following each other to create sort of breaking through and solve this through diplomacy.
Right. Mr. Al Ahmed, do you think any breakthrough can happen even with Secretary of State visit followed by two others coming from Turkey and elsewhere?
I doubt it at the foreseeable future, because the two sides are very much stuck on their position. Qatar is not willing to surrender its sovereignty, and the Saudi bloc does not want Qatar to have an independent decision. So I don't think there is a place for meeting here, or a place for them, a common ground for the two sides. The American role here is not to solve the problem, really, is to prolong it, because it serves the American stated goals of forcing the Gulf countries to stop what they call supporting of terrorism. So all sides are charged by the Americans of doing that. So they are trying to use this opportunity to pressure all the sides to give up supporting and funding terrorism.
But it seems that Secretary of State, Mr. Tillerson, has been somewhat successful, at least in pushing Qatar to do something about that. Mr. Tillerson signed a deal with Qatar to clamp down on, quote, financing for terrorists. The memo of understanding calls for the U.S. and Qatar to share information that zeroes in on sources of terrorism financing in the coming years. But the agreement falls short of Saudi-led quartet's expectations, even though it is being said in that way. But as we all know, Mr. Al Ahmed, what Secretary Tillerson wants, and also what Washington wants, is also similar memo and agreement coming from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, and some of the other countries, just as those being signed between Qatar and the United States.
Well, the Americans signed a similar memo or agreement with Saudi Arabia 11, 12 years ago, and that did not stop Saudi, thousands of Saudis traveling to fight with ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, Iraq, and other countries. So it is a memorandum of understanding. It's not really an agreement legally. So I doubt it will change much, and it's not significant in that from a legal point of view. It's not really significant, but I think it shows that the Tillerson approach is supporting the Qatari position here, and I think that was intentional, so he can balance the two sides, because Qatar stands alone vis-a-vis the majority of the GCC.
That's right.
And plus Egypt, so 3+1, yeah.
So, Professor, I want to have you, Mr. Zawahiri, very importantly respond to 2 points.
If you allow me,
I need to
If you allow
respond.
me just to comment.
Yes, you will have your chance, but you need to respond 2 points. One is whether this agreement is really useful or not, as your colleague earlier commented. Secondly is Secretary Tillerson's apparent try to, quote, side with Qatar on this issue, as your colleague also previously mentioned. 2 points, sir. Go ahead.
First of all, this memorandum is being prepared in the last year. So basically, it has nothing to deal with this crisis. According to the the information I have, that this is an outcome of a discussion between Doha and Washington for nearly 1 year, and this is the outcome, which is basically signing this memorandum. So we should not really link it with this or put it in the context of this crisis. The rejection of this memorandum from the quartet is just is an indicator that they are not showing flexibility in terms of finding solution. The other point, if I want to just to zoom in on Tillerson position, Tillerson and his colleague, the Department of Pentagon, they were facing a problem with the White House in the last 3-4 weeks because the president has different view on the crisis, and they tried to create a balance. The visit to me of Tillerson means that there is a one voice in Washington now toward this crisis, and this is the reason why Tillerson, I think, came to the region and he started his effort to support the Kuwaiti mediator. Tillerson is basically has two main concerns. One is to confirm that Qatar is actually cooperating with the United States in terms of war on terror, and there is nearly 20 years of cooperation between two countries. And his department and the Pentagon, they have the real information about this. The second issue, Tillerson does not seem convinced that the 13 demand or request from the 4 countries are realistic. Basically, he believed that those are forgotten and no longer on the table, and that was his first message when he touched on in Kuwait. So basically, he wanted a plan B. Plan B, he wanted more flexibility from 4 countries, which basically protect and guarantee the sovereignty of Qatar.
And now we are also joined from Washington, D.C., Joe Rubin, former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. Mr. Rubin, welcome to our program. Rushing over, thank you so much. I want you to respond about your colleague's comments. The division in Washington between the White House, the Pentagon, and the State Department about what to do in the Middle East. We all know all of this seems to be circling around us, dramatic stories after President Trump's visit to the Middle East earlier. So, Mr. Rubin, you want to comment about that first?
Yes. Yes, thank you, and thank you for having me. And the changes in American policy towards the Middle East are significant, but not clear at this stage. And the White House has been undergoing multiple policy reviews on Iran, on Syria, on other issues of concern to try to figure out its next steps. But in the meantime, this Gulf crisis has as world events always do, come in and just, in a sense, it injected itself in the midst of the discussion, regardless of the well-laid planning of the White House. And I agree with the previous speaker. I do believe that the disconnect between the State Department, the Defense Department, and the White House has created a dynamic of confusion about where the administration wants to go on this Gulf crisis. And Secretary Tillerson is trying to show leadership in stepping into it, and he has a lot of support for trying to resolve this on Capitol Hill as well.
But obviously he has not been successful, at least for now. There has not been, as mentioned earlier, any public announcement about that. More regional leaders are going to the region trying to handle the situation, not likely to come out with any possible result either. So what are we seeing right now? Is Washington losing control of persuasion power over its Gulf region allies, whether it's Qatar or some of the other countries as well?
I think that we are at a very, very critical inflection point. There was an expectation after President Trump's visit to the Gulf that there would be unity amongst the Sunnis, and in a sense, the tearing apart of that by this crisis has really undermined that perception that President Trump has the ability to corral the Gulf countries and the Sunni Arab world in a unified action. And so as a result of that, there is growing actual skepticism and concern about Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, United Arab Emirates, and why are they continuing to reject calls for moderation, calls for a reconciliation process? What's really behind their motivations? And it could boomerang into, and we saw this recently several weeks ago in congressional voices of concern about Saudi Arabia when there was a vote where 47 out of 100 senators voted to oppose an arms sale to Saudi Arabia. That's very close to being rejected. So in the meantime, this uncertainty, it does put the United States in a difficult leadership position, but we are the essential ingredient here to bringing the parties together.
Okay.
But we do need to see Saudi Arabia and the Emirates step into it as well.
But you know, this is a very weird situation, Mr. Al Ahmed, if you know what I'm talking about. That is, earlier we have seen from the Obama administration, even toward the Trump administration, talking about the U.S. From now on, do not have to depend on the situation in the Middle East because the U.S. have got shale gas. It do not need to depend on the energy coming from that region anymore. It's going to set the U.S. free. But now you think about that. Before that has been achieved by Washington, it seems that the Gulf countries are already taking on their own life in a way and not necessarily listen to Washington anymore, at least for now. Mr. Al Ahmed, what do you think about that?
Well, I think for a long time, the Gulf countries have actually been almost getting the United States to do their to carry out their policy. If you look at the wars, the American wars in Iraq, most of them were done on behalf of Gulf countries of Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, and to further their ends. The war in Yemen, for example, is another example of how the Saudis got the Americans and the British to do their dirty work for them. It is true that the narrative that America needs Gulf oil was really, this was almost created out of nothing, because if we looked at the numbers, the oil that comes from the Gulf countries is about $50 billion a year, where the oil that's coming out of the Venezuela, for example, is greater than that, or out of Canada. But nobody talks about the bad relationship between the US and Venezuela and link it to oil. So really here it was created by PR companies and by politicians in the United States to justify American support to GCC countries. I just want to add that Bob Corker, the most important senator in terms of foreign policy, also yesterday accused Saudi Arabia of funding terrorism. So we are looking at a situation where so many players are involved, and that's why this crisis will be longer and will extend way more than we think. And at the end of the day, both sides will lose because they will drain their resources to the benefit of arms dealers and politicians abroad.
And this is what exactly we're talking about here, Professor Zveri, because if you have friends in the Gulf regions now, they would tell you everything has come to a stop right now because of the chaotic situation for the relations among these countries. Nothing can be done. No business deals, major ones, of course, I'm talking about. Not necessarily cross-country relations being conducted at this point. And also, when you talk about anti-terrorism and many other things going on in the region, it's all come to a stop. So, Professor Zveri, what are we embracing now as a result of all of this? What is in the horizon? It's kind of dangerous, isn't it? Briefly.
It is in a dangerous situation. This crisis, there are two things here we are witnessing in the region. The demonization, for example, of Qatar through the public opinion, and the other one is the culture of hatred between the people and the Gulf. And that is something we have not witnessed in modern history at all. And I think this crisis, the economic loss, for example, is not actually the loss of Qatar, it's the loss of all players. And as one of the politicians said, that if Qatar loses $1, others will lose also $1 as well. So basically, it is the loss for all players, because this is an important region. The world keeps its eyes on the region.
Right.
It's important for the source of energy. It's important for sort of stability and security. And any instability will affect not only the region, but also beyond the region.
That's right.
We witnessed, for example, the statement from China that the wanted the countries to work quickly and fix this problem, because basically there will be a bad ramification. And I think there is a concern also of Japan and Europeans.
Right.
For that reason, we witnessed a lot of effort from Germany, for example, and as I mentioned, France as well is joining, and also the British. So basically, it is a very, we are in a very critical time.
This is a critical time. This is a critical time. That's why we need to figure out some solutions. And Mr. Rubin, therefore, I want to go to you before we wrap it up. You know, ramifications, negative ones, that's all we are concerned about. Little things in the Middle East could be always spur out of control, as we say. What can Washington do now? If Washington at the very beginning planted seeds of instability, what can Washington now do to revive the crisis? One Secretary of State is not enough.
One Secretary of State is not enough, and it's an open secret that the United States military values Qatar, has a strong relationship with Qatar through our air base, Al Udeid, in Qatar, as well as through support that Qatar has provided to the Free Syrian Army in Syria, opposing Assad, support for airstrikes that we have executed. So we need a whole-of-government approach. We need the Defense Department and the State Department to lean in, and the United States needs to make it very clear to the regional allies that we have, like Saudi Arabia as well, that they need to change their approach, that this is bad for our security, it's bad for their security, it's bad for the fight against the Islamic State, and it needs to come to an end quickly.
All right. Mr. Al Ahmed, the final word for you, 20 seconds if you can, sir. We're running out of time. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the crisis will continue, and I think the American administration is trying to make it longer because it's beneficial. There is division of labor here, and I think because, like I said before, it's advantageous for the United States to continue this crisis.
Yeah. Joe Rubin, Ali El Ahmed, and Mahjoub Zweri, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. We'll see what's going to happen in the near future. Thank you. You're watching World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live on CGTN from Beijing. Still to come on our program. It has been 1 year since the South China Sea arbitration case strained the China-Filipino ties. But how have these bilateral ties improved since the inauguration of Philippine President Duterte? I speak with a well-known also AI company in China. Visit our showroom and see what they have got over there and what it takes to compete with others internally and also in the international market. You're watching World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live Monday to Friday on CGTN. On the issue of South China Sea and the relations between China and the Philippines, a year ago on July the 12th, the Philippine government unilaterally put China and Philippine ties in limbo with the so-called arbitration. However, positive changes have since taken place thanks to a very different approach from the new Philippine administration. We'll talk about that later, but first take a look at this.
A summary of a softer tone. On Wednesday, Philippine Department of Foreign Affairs issued a statement marking the one-year anniversary of the South China Sea arbitration ruling. It reaffirmed Manila's commitment to protecting its territorial claims and what it says are the country's maritime rights. And, with a friendlier stance, they believe the South China Sea dispute should be resolved in the spirit of good relations, upholding dialogue, cooperation, and development. No wonder China welcomes this.
Joint efforts by China and the Philippines have put the two countries back on the right track of peacefully resolving disputes through dialogue and consultation since last year, and bilateral ties have greatly improved. The two sides remain committed to pushing ahead with friendly and pragmatic cooperation in various sectors.
The right track Gung mentioned makes sense to not only the two countries. The DOC, signed by China and ASEAN member states, including the Philippines, in 2002 states, The parties concerned undertake to resolve their territorial and jurisdictional disputes by peaceful means, through friendly consultations and negotiations by sovereign states directly concerned. It all started in 2013, when the then Aquino Third administration unilaterally pressed ahead with the arbitration case without prior discussion with China. China claims the case has no basis in international law, thus would never accept the July 12th ruling. The inauguration of new Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte last June became a game-changer. His administration set aside the South China Sea dispute over developing closer ties with China.
To open frontiers of friendship and cooperation, and some dark spots in the relationships, or better still, you might call it gray areas. So we want this totally erased, and I want to establish a more cohesive, a stronger bond between China and the Philippines.
The past months have seen Duterte's wish become a reality due to joint efforts of both countries. The lessons for both, cooperation and dialogue, usually speak louder than confrontation.
Understand better about the latest changes, we talked to Gao Zhikai, our current affairs commentator. Mr. Gao, welcome to our program.
Thank you.
First of all, what do you make of the general idea of this statement 1 year after the so-called arbitration?
I think, yes, today and yesterday marked the 1 year anniversary of the announcement of the arbitration result concerning the South China Sea dispute. On the other hand, the Chinese position has always been very consistent and very well known and well expressed to the Philippines. That is, China does not recognize the validity and the binding effect of this arbitration ruling. And I think 1 year from the ruling, the situation is very clear and very self-evident. That is, China and the Philippines have demonstrated that they have enough wisdom and courage and vision to handle their territorial dispute in a responsible way, in a peaceful manner, through negotiations and through cooperation rather than through confrontation. And I think this sets a good example, not only for this particular territorial dispute involving China and the Philippines, but also for other countries in the world.
Well, Mr. Gao, as you may know now, the two administrations, both here in China and also in the Philippines, are very strong supporters, dialogue, friendly ties, but many wonder how sustainable is this likely to be given the quite complicated situation in the South China Sea and certainly geopolitical reasons as well.
Yes, I think both China and the Philippines should have the courage to acknowledge that there is a territorial dispute involving part of the South China Sea between China and the Philippines. But I think the greater wisdom is that while we acknowledge the existence of the territorial dispute, we have greater courage to encourage more cooperation between the two countries. And this is what the two governments and the two countries are doing right away. And I hope this megatrend will continue, which will bring stability to this part of the world and will ensure that both the Chinese people and the Filipino people will benefit from closer cooperation between the two countries despite of the existence of the territorial dispute.
Mr. Gao, as you may know, territorial disputes better handled by the parties involved, directly the parties involved, China and the Philippines, but as you may know very well, there are many more complicated factors. For example, the role of the United States in the Asia-Pacific region. The issues date back from the Obama administration now with the President Trump, who is, quote, like the art of the deals. What is likely to happen is a big question mark there. So how can the two countries, China and Philippines, be sophisticated and smart enough to be able to handle this issue on their own agenda with their own timetable?
Yes, indeed. For the very sensitive and potentially explosive territorial dispute between China and the Philippines, the worst enemy is actually third-party involvement by another country. And I think both China and the Philippines should have enough wisdom to avoid a situation where either China or the Philippines will be used as a pawn by another country in achieving its strategic objective. Both China and the Philippines do not want to have confrontation with each other. We want to handle the territorial dispute in a responsible way, in a transparent way, and I hope other countries, especially the United States under President Donald Trump, would also see that more peace and stability between China and the Philippines will be a good thing to be encouraged rather than to be sabotaged. And in this way, I hope peace will prevail in the South China Sea, and all these countries, including China and the Philippines, will devote more to peaceful development and cooperation and good neighborliness with each other. This will be a better choice for this part of the world.
Right. Gao Zhikai, thank you so much for being with us. Gao Zhikai, our current affairs commentator. Appreciate it. You're watching World Insight. We'll be back after this. You're watching World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live on CGTN. If there is one word that's likely to earmark the year 2017, it must be AI, or artificial intelligence. And the business world has jumped on it, especially new budding companies, which consider it the chance for their future. And many of them are from China. So how well is China riding the tide of AI? Can it be a leader in the field?
Technology changing the world. This is just one of the many conferences being held in China throughout the year, showcasing state-of-the-art products and technologies, including those related to artificial intelligence. AI has long become a familiar word to Chinese. Even earlier this year at the annual conference for China's National People's Congress, a video capturing an off-the-cuff moment of Chinese Premier Li Keqiang discussing AI with entrepreneurs went viral.
Artificial intelligence is changing the world.
The man in the video is the president of iFlytek, a Chinese software company specializing in artificial intelligence. The company started by specializing in voice-based internet and mobile products, such as phone apps for simultaneous multilingual translation, voice input, and Siri-like intelligent personal assistant programs. Now it doesn't want to miss the speeding train of AI. Indeed, it aspires to become a leader in the field.
That company was even recently listed in the MIT 50 smartest companies, rivaling some of the most established Chinese companies in the field. So in order to find out what exactly is the truth, seeing is believing, as they say, I went into the showroom of iFlytek, not for advertisement or commercial, but rather for a discussion and a discovery about the latest tech applications and gears related to AI and how a young Chinese company is functioning. Jiang Wuxu is the general manager of the International Development Department, briefed me on some of their voice recognition technology products.
First of all, let me show you our translation applications.
Okay.
Basically, it can support many languages by your voice. So we can try Chinese to English though.
Go ahead.
今天我想请你看电影。
I want to invite you to see a film today.
I'd rather not.
哦。
我不愿意。
最近的米其林餐厅在哪儿？
Oh, you want to invite me to dinner?
Where's the nearest Michelin restaurant?
宫保鸡丁可以吗？
How about Kung Pao chicken?
宫保鸡丁啊，说好了。
对。
You promised the Kung Pao chicken.
Yeah. Okay. This is our smart home solution. Imagine you are sitting in a home.
On the couch at home.
Yes. 100，打开加湿器。
好的，请将您的加湿器打开。
That's quite cool.
We've got a better stuff.
Really?
It's black technology. You can really speak and then convert text in the real time and then translate into different languages.
All at the same time.
All at the same time.
Wow.
Yeah. So let me show you.
Okay.
Yeah, let me show you. 今天 NBA 总决赛勇士赢了，我很不开心。 我觉得勒布朗詹姆斯打得挺好的。
Wow, that's really cool. I guess LeBron James will be really happy. He has fans in China.
I think they will be better next year. Okay.
All right. But seriously, we should now talk about what's going to happen with AI.
Yeah, let's talk.
Earlier, you demonstrated quite a number of technologies that you have been using and also make it really available in a very massive market. Your company is very young.
We just had our 18th birthday, a couple of days ago. Yeah. So we just treat it very preciously because we think 18 is the age to go to like a grown man.
But you think about it, 18 years ago and now, huge difference.
Exactly. Yes. We can feel the wave of popularity of the terms speech. Maybe some of the company just cannot survive because of the vision, or some of the actions may be harmful for the company. But for our company, we think we've got our vision. We think definitely speech is the ultimate user interface in the future. But we have to survive, right? In 2004, we got break even. But how we do that, we have to do some system integration things to make us survive. And then we put all the profits into the R&D. That's to make the wheels going on and on.
Of course, the Chinese market is enormous. We see the benefits of that demonstrated, let's just say, by WeChat, for example, which is now going everywhere. With this kind of application advantages in the Chinese market, you do have certain competitive edge. But on the other hand, how much can you really maintain by only following and observing what the others are doing and therefore apply it to the Chinese market?
In China domestically, we have to face BAT, to be frank. But we think we are differentiating. We were the startup company 10 years or 15 years ago, but we have to wait about 15 years. Now everybody think speech conversational interface is coming because of the AI technology. So now, and many companies think AI is the hotspot. So everybody proposed their concept with the AI things will make them more advanced or make them popular. But we are still solid. We are very confident in what we are doing. So for those companies, we think they are a surfing company. So like surfing the wave.
What about your international competition?
We think Amazon, Google is doing great, and we are learning creating the ecosystem and doing very detailed and user-friendly interface and solutions for the end users. And also, we know Chinese better, so that's why we're learning from them. On the other hand, we want to go globally, but how we can do that? So we think Belt and Road Initiative is one of the choice.
Wait. Everybody say Belt and Road Initiative is a solution. But how exactly that's going to happen?
From our perspective, we think language is the barrier to communicate. So we can provide the language support towards that. We are very good at speech technology. So for example, we are having our multinational voice cloud in Xinjiang to provide the language support among the Western Asian area. So it will help to increase social activities and also the economic aspects in that area. And after the Western Asia, we can have more joint lab with the Middle East and also the East Europe, so that we can deliver more and more capabilities towards the language translation things. I think the significance of doing this is not only for supporting the initiative, but also for us to find a way to be in a step of the globalization. This is one thing. The second point is we establish our cooperation in the States to maintain the highest level of scientific research. Also, we are trying some subsidiaries operating locally in certain territory, like Japan, like Singapore.
Advantages, disadvantages compared to some of your international competitors?
Well, firstly, I think the US or the multinational companies are pretty good at scientific research and also the engineering technologies. But in China, we think our innovation is more related to the client needs and also increasing efficiency. So we think if Chinese companies can focus more on the innovation driven by applications, that will give us more advantages compared to other multinationals.
What do you make of the future? Where is it going to be?
AI plus, because humans have their own lifestyle and also they have their jobs. And they also have to have services from the society. So that divided into two sub-concepts. One is AI plus lifestyle, and the other one is AI plus vertical industries. So you will need a better assistant in education, a good teacher, or you will have a better healthcare. And also you may need a better lawyer. So in the future, that will be the market and also the future of our mission. This is one thing. The other one thing is that when you are home, when you are studying, or when you are driving, so that's your personal life. So we also have to have the mission to change the way of human interaction with machines.
How far are we talking about here?
Now we are talking about 10 years. So we have already been made many progresses in the vertical industries. And after the increase of the hotspot of the AI, and the technology is going to be better than ever.
A case study of very young Chinese company dealing with AI. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us. World Insights CGTN in your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian and everyone on World Insight team, thanks for watching. And tune in again tomorrow for insights across China and around the world. Good night.